Hello, this is Steve from That Religious Studies website, and I just want to talk a little bit about making notes when you're reading texts and articles related to your studies, and just offer a few suggestions for how to make notes when you're doing this. Now, I can't emphasize enough the importance of reading original texts when you're studying subjects related to philosophy, philosophy of religion, moral theory, etc. However, when you do this, it's important to really get a grasp and an understanding of what the person is saying, and more importantly, to put that in your own words, to find a way to express that in a way that makes sense to you. I mean, we're dealing with basically fairly bland presentations of material, page after page after page of writing. So it's all a question of trying to synthesize that in such a way that we can understand it, and kind of be able to refer back to it in a meaningful way as well. Now, I'm sure that when you read textbooks, that a common practice, as I do, is to actually underline things, and I also make notes as I go along. But we all, I would suggest, have got into the idea of underlining texts, and then on the basis of that, probably writing out page after page of notes. These are my notes on feminist theology, particularly the issue of medical ethics, bioethics, and it's just page after page after page of writing. Now, one of the things that this does is that it often gives us this idea that we've understood things, because we've got pages of writing in front of us, therefore we must have been doing some work, we must have been doing some thinking, we obviously understand the things that we've been reading, so that's great. But the problem is that having read all of this information in the book, and having made all these notes, we've now got to reread all these notes in order to do something with them. And in fact, this is basically just copying out a book. You might as well have just copied out pages out of a book, in a sense. I came across this book a while ago called the Mind Map book, and although not everything in this book I agree with, one of the things I did like is that the authors are saying, look, this idea of writing things down in this linear fashion, it just is really difficult to do something useful with these notes. And in fact, if you think about it, as you're writing things down, you're kind of lulling yourself to sleep. You're zoning out in one sense. I mean, it's a very boring way to present material. It's a very difficult way to work around the material and to do anything with it. And also, because you're kind of going across the page, in the end you're just like counting sheep, you're just lulling yourself to sleep. You're going to get bored. I mean, it's ultimately totally boring. Now, one thing you could do is to get a marker and to colour in the page. Or another thing to do is to express the information in a different way. And so I've been doing some reading on the subject of abortion for a new lesson I'm preparing for my website. And so the other day I read an article out of this book, 13 Questions, and it's a book, and it's basically the article on the question of abortion. So just looking at the whole thing of abortion and what it is. And what I did is I underlined passages and made my notes as I showed you before. And then what I did on the basis of this is I made a kind of a mind map, and I just literally took ideas from the things that I'd underlined. They're obviously important to me in terms of remembering them. I just took them and I just roughed out a mind map. So I started with an idea of abortion, sometimes always never, and moved on to the issue of pro-life, pro-choice. And as the article just talked about things, so I was just writing ideas down, and I came up with this preliminary mind map. Now, that's all very well, great. It's a different way of understanding the material. I certainly did take things in a lot more than I normally did, but it's still fairly dull. I mean, it's not very sort of visually stimulating, and it's a little bit hard to navigate around. So what the mind map book authors suggest is that you create a kind of a more colourful version of what you've got, what you've just seen. So here's my mind map on the question of abortion from 13 Questions in Ethics. And what I did is I wrote the title of the thing that I was reading, the article I was reading, and the book that it came from, and the pages at the top, just so I can refer back to it, so I know what this is. And then in the middle, I mean, this is not something I'm going to do for every mind map I create, but in the middle I thought it was a really useful thing to have a quotation which summarised what the authors were essentially arguing for in this article. And so you can see there are very similar things here, like I took, you know, the article talks about Christianity, Judaism, the issue of when do you become a person, prior to birth or at birth, Roe versus Wade, and I just literally presented them in a little bit more of a colourful, more visually stimulating manner. And also what I did is I took some pictures off the internet related to the article and stuck them down, again, as a way of just generating some interest, but also to get me thinking about things. Like, for example, one of the things here that the article says is that human characteristics, like for example the fact that you can move, or the fact that something is able to breathe, is not a uniquely human trait. And I found this really interesting picture of human, chimpanzee and koala bear fingerprints, and it's very difficult to tell which one's which. In other words, you can't just say that because something's got a fingerprint it's human. And that stimulated my thinking just based on looking at that picture. I remember something I read in this article. I'm not ploughing through pages and pages of notes trying to find out what I actually was thinking. I mean, look at the difference between this way and this. I'm not ploughing through there thinking, oh, I remember reading something about fingerprints at one point. No, there you go. It's there in a picture at the bottom. I mean, here's another little picture I found. This is a picture of the cells dividing 66 hours after insemination. I just wrote at the bottom there, is this a person? Can you ascribe to that personhood? I had found a picture of a judge's gavel and some legal books, just to remind me that I was looking at the legal things there, the Roe versus Wade. I drew a picture of the American flag because that was essentially an American thing. And this is my sometimes always never from the abortion in the middle, this abortion statement in the middle, sometimes always never. And I thought in this instance I'd actually make a more of a distinction between the pro-choice and pro-life ways of thinking about these things. So there's lots of things that have kind of sparked ideas as I've been going along, but also this is essentially a visual summary of the passage in this book. So I've distilled all this information down from this, all of this, down to this. And if you're like me, if you struggle with remembering things and you need a way to kind of stimulate your thinking, then this might be a technique for you to use. And I'm certainly going to use these a lot more than I have been, and maybe it's something that you would find useful too.